So last year I wrote a book called A Time for Truth. And in the book, one of the chapters is talking about the year I spent as a law clerk at the Supreme Court. And it describes, the chapter begins with me watching pornography on the internet with Sandra Day O'Connor, which was a bit of a bizarre experience. It was the first of the internet porn cases to go to the court, and the court librarians were showing the justices what the internet was, and they pull it up. And the story I told, I was clerking for Chief Justice Rehnquist. They paired the Chief Justice and Justice O'Connor and their law clerks were in this little room looking at this computer screen that pulls up hardcore porn. And Justice O'Connor, I still remember she leaned forward and she squinted and said, "Oh my." But the Marco piece of this, so the book comes out and there were some, reporters thought that was a funny story,
Right.
so they wrote about that story. And I'm on a plane and Marco texts me and says, "Holy cow, you watch porn? Our Oppo researchers missed that." Now that was funny.
You've lived in Washington, you've worked in Washington, you lived here in New York, you went to Princeton University undergraduate, you went to Harvard Law School. Are you a product of the Northeast or of Texas?
Look, I am very much a product of Texas. I am a Cuban, Irish, Italian, Texan, which is an odd mix to be sure. And I remember when I went off to Harvard Law School, my dad jokingly referred to it as missionary work.
Is that right?
Thank you, Senator Cruz and Heidi. My question's I'm curious, where did you two first go on a date together, and what were your impressions of each other?
Great question.
Well, we met on January 2nd of 2000. So we were both working on the George W. Bush campaign. We were down in Austin. And our first date was just 3 days later. It was on January 5th. And we were in cubicles, I don't know, about 30 feet apart from each other. And about 9:30 at night, I sauntered over to her cubicle, trying to pretend I was cool, and said, hey, have you had dinner yet? And it was a campaign, so at 9:30 at night, neither of us had dinner. And so we went to a restaurant that was called the Bitter End, and it was just a couple blocks from the campaign, and we had a dinner that lasted 3-4 hours. I mean, we shut the restaurant down. And it was a wonderful dinner. It was a dinner that we talked the whole time, and it was, I got to say, with us, it was love at first sight. I mean, it really was. I remember at that dinner, I asked her, I said, tell me the history of your family, starting with the birth of your grandparents. And it was just, both of us had been coming out of, we both had pretty serious long-term relationships. She'd had a serious boyfriend, I had a serious girlfriend. We'd both broken up just a couple of months earlier. And we were both in our late 20s. We were at a point when we were, I think, looking for someone. And it was, she was my soulmate. And, she was at the time in her second year at Harvard Business School. And she had a month off in January that they didn't have classes. And so that January we dated, and then the end of January I drove Heidi to the airport, and I'm dropping her off at the airport, and I said, well, what do we do? And she says, I want you to call me every night. And I said, well, I'm getting home at like 2 and 3 in the morning. And she'd been on the campaign, she knew that was true. She said, I don't care, call me then. So I would call her every night at either 2 or 3 in the morning. It'd be 3 or 4 in the morning East Coast time. And we'd spend a half hour, we'd spend an hour on the phone. There were a bunch of nights where one or the other of us would fall asleep on the phone, and the noise of the phone would wake us up. And so I'll let Heidi tell her story, which may be totally different.
Well, I let Ted answer that question because he loves to answer that question. And so I always let him tell his version
She
of it.
kind of knows my stories. She kind of knows my stories.
But it's very accurate. It really was love at first sight. And one thing I want to add to that I think is worth noting is that Ted is an incredible listener. Ted Cruz is an incredible listener. I want all voters to hear that. And one reason is he really cares. He really cares about what you're saying. He really cares about what's on your heart. And he cares about the context, not just a fact or a figure, but really the context around it. I remember one thing I told you that night. You asked me, maybe it was even a few days later, what were some of the things that I particularly liked, a necklace or some flowers. And to the actual venue, not more than a couple weeks later, appeared in the snow of Boston, some beautiful red roses on my doorstep from the exact florist that was very difficult to find. Ted is a great listener, and my daughters have said many times that at home, off the stage, Mom does all the talking and Dad listens.
That's
So Ted has many, many qualities, and thoughtfulness is right at the top of the list.
Mrs. Cruz, let me ask you, I heard an interview recently where you talked about your wedding night in cans of soup. What, for those who didn't see that, can you explain this?
I will explain. You know, this was an experience at the beginning of our life together, and so I did recount it to Megan the other day.
That's where it was. Yeah.
You know, I grew up in California in a home where my parents spent a lot of time outdoors. So we had our own garden, we grew our own vegetables, and my mom did a lot of things that were homemade. So when I married Ted, we got back from our honeymoon, and he went off to the store and came home by himself. And I was completely shocked to see that he arrived back at our apartment with literally 100 cans of Campbell's chunky soup. I never bought 100 of anything.
All the same?
Well, different
kinds.
Different kinds.
Yeah, you gotta have some chicken, some beef, you know.
Okay.
This was shocking to me. So we had a tough conversation about it, and I said, "You don't buy 100 of anything, much less canned soup. Well, you know, we can't do this. I'll be making things." And he said, "No, I know you won't be making things." And so the next morning, it was a weekend morning. I loaded up our car before he woke up and returned every single can. And when I got home, I called my mother just to make sure I'd done the right thing as a newlywed, and she emphatically disagreed with me. And so when Ted opened the pantry, I had to tell him quickly that I would go back and buy those cans again. She said, in fact, "Are you going to cook every night?" We were both working at the time, and I'm really not a good cook, Anderson. I've tried, I've burnt most things. I think the last time I tried to make
We're both terrible cooks.
pasta
That
and
is
shrimp,
not
and I
not a
burnt it.
skill either one of
So
us
she
has.
said
Good to
wisely.
know what your strengths are. You know.
She said wisely, "It is not your strength. I cleaned my mother's house growing up. I can clean a house like nobody's business, but I'm not a great cook." Yeah. So she said, "Since you probably won't cook a lot for him, you should let the man eat his dinner."
All right. This is Jeffrey Lax. He's a college professor at Kingsborough Community College here in New York. He says he's leaning toward voting for you, Senator Cruz. Jeffrey?
More than leaning.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
As a father of two little boys who are around the same age as your two little girls, I've really respected and admired the way you've engaged your family throughout this campaign. And I also know as a parent that we do a lot of really annoying things to the kids. Yeah. What would your family say is the most annoying thing about you?
Now, Jeffrey, that's a very good question. Let me ask you real quickly. What do you teach? You're a professor of what?
I teach law.
You teach law. Well, very good. Well, it would certainly vary. I think in any family it would depend on who you're talking about. I suspect, although you can ask her directly, if Heidi were listing something, I suspect what she would say is my iPhone. She hates my iPhone. And I will admit I am addicted to my iPhone, and I play iPhone games a lot. I'm either on Twitter and email, or I'm on iPhone games. And Heidi can't stand it. She has many times wanted to throw it out the window. Now, the flip side is the girls love the iPhone, and we, in fact, fight and play. We play Plants vs. Zombies together, and we play Candy Crush and all sorts of games on the iPhone, and it drives Mommy crazy. The girls, you know, we have something of a game where to get a hug and kiss from the girls, I usually have to do about 4 laps chasing them in the living room, and one will go one way and one will go the other way, and I have to tackle them. They usually get their goodnight hugs hanging upside down by their feet. And we have fun. I don't know what the girls would say is the most annoying, but I suspect that's what Heidi would.
Good answer.
That's right.
That's a good answer. And I guess, Anderson, you could ask them, although it might be risky.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me ask you on Twitter, do you follow Donald Trump on Twitter?
I do.
You do?
Although the truth of the matter is you could sit alone in a woods in the middle of nowhere and somehow still hear Donald's tweets.
When was there an instance when you knew you should have taken your wife's advice on something, but you didn't, and then you lived to regret it later?
That's an awfully good question.
No pressure.
I'm going to learn something tonight.
You know, to be honest, there are very few times when I haven't taken her advice. I mean, one of the things, one of the things about our relationship that is fun, and it actually, because we started out long distance, it was actually a great way to build a relationship where you spend the time on the phone talking constantly. And so we became best friends in the process of falling in love. And so Heidi now, even when we're on the road, she's in one city, I'm in another city often, and we'll call 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day and talk about what's going on, what we're doing, and we usually reach decisions collaboratively. I'm failing to come up with an instance when I haven't followed her advice.
Mrs. Cruz, do you have one?
Well, I can add something
She
in
may
here.
have a longer list. So.
I can add something in here.
I would
There
so
is
love it if you took a list out of your pocket right now.
Well, you know, Ted does always do what he says he's going to do, but he doesn't always do what he's told.
I see.
There's a
That's
distinction. So sometimes you don't take out the trash right when I ask you to, but that's some advice. But you know, one thing that's interesting about Ted that I love about Ted is he is very, like I said, thoughtful in a personal way, but he's also very, very thoughtful professionally. And Ted does not often make the mistake of saying things or doing things that he doesn't own. And so while he's an incredible listener, he's got an amazing team around him, this is an individual that I think is prepared for leadership because he takes responsibility for his actions. And so I usually sleep pretty well at night knowing that he's thought it through.
Thank you for your question. We got Bruce, welcome.
Senator Cruz, the last president who had a son was George Bush Sr. All the presidents after him have had daughters.
Yeah.
Is there a secret to raising daughters that'll get you into the White House?
You know, look, it is a great question. I will tell you, raising daughters is a wonderful experience. It is so much fun. Little girls are so much a joy. I remember, so I'm glad Caroline's 8th birthday party we're doing Build-A-Bear, because her 6th birthday party, I remember very well that she had a princess sleepover party, and she had 11 of her classmates come over, and their favorite game at the sleepover party was Attack the Daddy. And I will tell you, having 11 6-year-old girls dressed as Disney princesses attacking you, I mean, it's out of Lord of the Flies. It is terrifying. And there are moments, I mean, there are moments of humility that being the father of daughters instills in you, such as, you know, more than once they have put every one of their hair ribbons all over Daddy. We don't allow photographs of that. That is a rule. And indeed, just a couple of days ago, I was back for Caroline's daddy-daughter picnic at school, which featured all the dads running and playing games. And
my favorite.
Your favorite was that she got to dress up Daddy in like this pink boa and these like big goofy looking underwear.
And FYI, that was on a videotape the whole time.
Uh-oh.
And now it's a class video that they're sending out to all the parents.
Oh, really?
But it does. Now, I will give you the flip side. So I talk about these girls all the time, and they're very different. Catherine is sweet. Caroline is rascally. Catherine is like her mommy. Caroline is like her daddy. Poor girl. But I will tell you a funny story about this sweet one. So we're flying, and I wanted to get a hug from Caroline, and Caroline did like she usually does. She runs away. And Catherine walks up and says, "Daddy, would you like a hug?" And she crawls into my lap, and she gives these hugs she calls marshmallow hugs that are just the sweetest thing in the world. And then she slides out of my lap and she says, "Daddy, who do you love better, me or Caroline?" And my answer, I said, "Sweetheart, I love both of you equally." And she said, "But Caroline wouldn't hug you," and I just did.
Let me add one thing, Anderson, which to all the fathers who are here, there's nothing more important in a family than the confidence that fathers can give to their girls. And thank you all for being great fathers. It's so important for girls to feel the love of the men in their life.